Good evening. So I'm just sharing my screen.
Ramanna.
So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So we discussed about architecture yesterday, where we were trying to understand what are the software components which would be there, and how do you identify in a customer landscape. So for we just understood that what are the essential things which we need to look into. So so those are all about the software components. But when it comes to tools, we already familiar with it. So this is how the tools for each area, which enables us to do the things right. And for building Fiori applications, we do have a Fiori elements approach and freestyle approach. So these are the two approaches for building Fiori apps. So right now, so there could be additional approaches might be coming out or coming up as SAP introduced. But right now we do have two approaches where elements approach and freestyle approach. So and the tool right now we use is WebID still exists, but Fiori 1.0 apps relied on Eclipse-based development, and later for I mean Fiori 2.0 apps generally were built using WebID. And the successor of WebID, the next version was now Business Hub Studio, and still both WebID and Business Hub Studio are relevant today. And very soon, once Business Hub Studio is very much stable and everything is good, WebID would be stopped as a service, and going forward all the developments would be on Business Hub Studio. So the tools to use is Business Hub Studio and WebID if you are building it. And similarly, so far in Fiori 2.0 we used to have SCJW based or CDS use based approach to uh, build your OData services, etc. Now for building OData service also there are like two new approaches were introduced called RAP. So if you are using S4 HANA system, so going forward from 1909 onwards, then the recommended approach is RESTful programming model for building your OData services. And for the cloud applications, so now if the product is not S4 HANA, if it's any other product, so be it any product of SAP, like it could be Ariba or anything. So for any cloud solution or for using cloud platform, if you want to build some services which can be generically built for any platform, then CAP model is one which is recommended. And for both scenarios, so if you're someone intended targeting to both S4 HANA as well as cloud platform, for example, S4 HANA cloud as well as S4 HANA on-premise, then CDS use with SAP HANA. If you're having HANA database, then you can use CDS use. So in short and simple way to say, so CDS use is going to be a driving factor as a common platform for building OData services. And these are the new areas where new approaches are being introduced. And going forward, always it's just recommended to follow these approaches for building OData services. So in the Fiori front, how Fiori elements is getting introduced. So now these are the things, new things which are being introduced in terms of building OData services and etc. for the backend development. So this is how a simple way to put together. So we understood in terms of how the what all UI technologies are there, and then we understood what are the deep inside the server, what are the software components are there, and how the different tools and technologies are available to build respect to layers. So the top layer we use Business Studio with UFI as a framework, and it uses underlying HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript as a programming base. And here it uses RAP cap or CDS use as a base for building your OData services. Okay. So there are like new things up in the market as well. So we just try to understand why do we use frameworks in general. So what's the criteria? I mean, why generally frameworks are preferred? So if you are familiar with all the web development concepts, so when we say basic web development, so we can build any application using HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So at least minimum certain basics of web development are necessary to understand the benefits of frameworks. And at the same time, we need to for building our applications in UFI as well, we do use JavaScript as well. So if you are not very much comfortable with any of HTML, CSS is fine, but JavaScript knowing is must, because we use JavaScript to write the logic in using UFI as well. So, and CSS, though we have theme designer as a tool, so that is the one which we use to manage our CSS part, but a little understanding of CSS is important. So so I'll go there. So I'll just we'll try to do simple use cases using HTML, and then we'll try to understand how UFA framework tries to solve some of the problems of the basic web development approaches as well. And today I'm just going to simply say how frameworks where UFA stands in terms of other frameworks. So if you look at this is a generic open comparison. This is not to scale or measure as such. So each framework has its own benefits, but UFA is being main driver for SAP UFA adoption is SAP. So SAP is alone trying to currently use, and it's trying to promote SAP UFA framework. It's built on top of JavaScript and other open source libraries. And there is another called Angular. So Angular is very popular, and Angular is being backed by Google, and similarly React is being backed by Facebook. So Facebook community, etc. Those are the one they are driving it. If you see the Play Store also, it's because of Angular and React in general. Some of the new changes, etc., are being built in this. So each of them follow different ways. So if you see MVC support, SAP UFI, we know that it supports MVC, and for Angular also it's fully supported MVVC they call it. Whereas React, it's partially MVC model it supports in the same sense. And we call it something called single page application. So if you see, we just have single index page for all our UF applications. So we try to use a single container, and inside the container we add all the MVC folder structure. Even when you're running your application, all the application will be compressed into a single optimized file called preload file. So we do have a component file in UFI which contains all the MVC structure. So a component is generally a container, high level container. So inside that we load in terms of like modules. So model view controller will be our modules if you specifically look into it. So that approach we generally call it as single page applications. So they call it as SPA. So using single page application concept itself, all modern web applications are being built nowadays. Okay. And routing support, single page application, all are supported mostly. And every framework has different approaches. React partially supports these features kind of concepts, and rich control sets. So when we talk about control set, definitely UFA has lots of controls. So like around 850 controls are date as on date, and it's getting um, increased day and day as we progress. And response, when we say on all devices alike we can run, and most important thing is these are like closed source. We see practical personal applications using Angular and React, but whereas using SAP UFI, nobody actually builds consumer apps. So these all are like business applications itself. And we do have Open UFI if anybody wants to leverage Open UFI and build some applications. Still, it is possible, but it's not very popular for the consumer space. So it's just confined closed space where only within SAP community we do know about this framework. So in the outside world, you might be hearing Angular and React, but within SAP space, we use SAP UFI, but it's not very popular out of SAP ecosystem. So only within the SAP ecosystem, UFI is popular. And back then, I mean, native development, etc. It shows, but native development is available. But to extent how React supports the native development, it's maybe comparatively UFI, the kind of features, etc. are very minimalistic, you can say. So okay, this is in short comparison about. So to bridge this gap, so why we are talking about this is So there's a new concept in recently for as part of this Fury 3 as such in the recent decade as well. It was going around called web components. So what web components does is, uh, let me show you one quick understanding. So if you take any simple application, so two things we need to understand here. So if you open any notepad, a simple HTML application can be built this way. So we can just put a HTML tag out there, and all we can do is if you want to write a button control now, so all we can do is you can just add a body tag. So any framework also if you use, ultimately browser will render it back into a HTML page itself. So it will be, so no matter what framework you use, every framework when running on a browser should be, should be rendered as by the browser engine. It will render into back into this form. So in this case, if you generally notice any button tag etc, if at all you have to use, so we can specify it this way. So input tag as such, and you can say as type as button. So here we'll specify you know follow something. So anything, just I can just say this is my some paragraph tag, I'll just put it, and our basic application would be ML control basic tags. So all I have to do is, so if anything, any HTML content, so paragraph tags we have, and then we have some heading tags, etc. So stands for paragraph tag, and input like all types of radio button, combo box, etc. If I have to define, we generally use this. This is here. You can just save this file on your desktop as index or index.html or something, and you just have to say all files. So if we save this, if we double click on this, so this is a simple what do you call simple button. Made it inside. So UFA syntax way, I was just writing the same way. So so you just have to refresh it. So we generally write button in HTML tag this way. So this is a simple button. So what frameworks offers is, so as previously also in guidelines we have discussed, in UFA, if at all we have to need it, always these are the building blocks, basic building blocks, but this will not always serve our purpose. Now if I want to have different types of buttons etc, I have to write extensive code etc. Whereas if we look at the framework, now in UFA we have, for just for a button we have around 4 or 5 controls. So if I just go to this category, so in this category if I just look for some buttons, okay, I can just search for buttons, and if you look at button, there is one called add bookmark button. So that would you see, this is how we can write a simple with button bookmark button with icon we can add, and we can add one text as well. Whereas here you get a simple one. In order to add icon also, you have to use it either CSS or yeah, using some adding some icon or image etc. So it is not very standard way. So in order to define any button etc, we do have to try to make some more customized etc. Whereas by default in framework we get some flexibility. Like in this case, if you see, we want to have that as a reject button. Uh, generic way, frameworks allows us to add some properties. So using API, we can control or add some of the features, etc., more flexibly. What SAP does is SAP tries to uh, every release it tries to pack in some new features. So each button, if you see right from beginning to now, lots of new features got added. So we can have some invisible button, we can have some success button, and some emphasized button. The same button instead of text we can use as an icon. So these are like multiple flavors of same control can be extended and reused, and we can have lots of rich control sets with the help of framework. Now same thing application, if we look into it. So I'm going to just we have CDN as well, I can use that to show this. So on the home page, if you scroll down below, so if you see, this is how using a CDN it's generated. So if you see, this is a simple button in this case. So here I can write multiple ways of writing the same thing. So here if I set this to default now, so that we have something called properties and icon. So I can change different properties. If I remove the type, etc., it becomes normal. And I can have different types of buttons. I can say transparent, I can say full space, I can say reject, so it becomes red. So these are like we they define in terms of like custom properties. So how do we use these all controls is, for that we use something called API. So we need to understand the API for any framework. There is no earlier we if in within SAP also there is only the UFI framework has a well structured way of having an API. So API allows us to understand what all can be done for a control. Now if I search for button, no, this is part of M library. So for the simple button, see these are all buttons are there. So radio button, segmented button, overflow button, menu button, etc. So I can go to my button control, and we do see here 4 or 5 tabs as such. So the key ones are the here it defines what all buttons are available in the overview section. But we call it something called properties. So properties are nothing but the feature set. Now whether the icon can be clickable or not, they have defined as a property called active icon. So it supports any URI. So you can specify any URL and it redirects the moment you click on the icon. And you want to enable it or disable it, you simply have a property where you can set it to true. Now if simply I have to add this property, so I can just add enabled as false. So this property I can add it this way as enabled equal to I'll say false. So automatically it gets disabled. So these are some of the easiest ways of frameworks use the flexibility to add properties and play around. But the same thing in plain HTML, if at all we have to write, we have to write lots of for simple things. Also, we have to write lots of stuff to achieve the simple mechanisms. So these all reusable codes are being reduced. So efforts are being reduced with the help of frameworks. So frameworks offers much more flexibility, and this is just a start of it. So we'll try to explore and I'll try to explain more in subsequent classes. And the same, all the these are like properties can be written using JavaScript as well. For that, we use something called methods. So here, methods, when I say enabled in order to using JavaScript, this is in XML we are writing. So if you look carefully, so the snippet which we write here is in XML. The same thing if I have to write in the from the controller. So if I click on this, this is an action. To perform an action, we have something called events. So the events tab here defines what all the events supported by this particular control. Now button supports press and tap. So tap would be used in case of your tablet or mobile devices, whereas in general press is used for, as a generic event. So when we try to click this control, so we can specify that event can be triggered. Now in our case, if I specify here press as on show hello. So if I say on button press, okay. So if I specify on button press, I'll just say it as enable again. And then on button press, I can in my controller. So in controller, we write in JS. So this is in XML syntax, whereas this is JS syntax. So here I can say, so this on So here we can specify all our logic. So here when we is how to same if now I have enabled earlier in using or view, so I use property. Now same thing if using methods. Methods are nothing but using JavaScript libraries. So these are all derived classes of your parent control of sap.ui.control. So we can use get enabled. So this is a method which we have under methods if you see. So using get enabled also we can try to specify. So here I can say, so this dot get view dot id. I can just specify my location of the button. So which one and by what method we want to use. You can simply say as false. And my button ID is hello button. So I'll say specify where my control is, and in the view my control is at hello button. This is the button, and I want to say in this case if I want to read the data what exactly it is there, I'll use get. If I have to set it, I'll say set value. So set enable, I'll set it to false. So now if you see set enabled false, I said it, but when this should have been triggered, the moment I click on the button. So on button press, I'm specifying it to set enabled to false. Now the moment I click on it, the event gets triggered. So that is what the press event is all about. So in the view, if you see here press, so press is nothing but the event. So the moment I click on it, so the logic has been executed. So, so this is a simple way to understand the framework, how it tries to organize the rich controls, etc. In the view, we can use straight away properties, and the same thing to dynamically control, we use events. So every control has different events. Do not assume that always there will be a press event. So and the properties also can vary from control to control. So how the framework is implemented based on that. These all are custom. So even the tags, XML tags are custom tags where only SAP has defined it. HTML tags could be different. Your UFA tags could be different and your Angular tags could be different. All tags are custom tags. So XML is nothing but a custom tags. It looks like HTML, but all are SAP defined names in terms of active icon is defined by SAP. So these all are like custom properties. So this is simple way to understand usage of API. Okay. Now these all are like basic. So I just talked about, now we understood from plain HTML framework offers some rich features which reduces our work. Now they increase the bar to some extent using something called web components. So what are web components? So now similarly like UFI, we do have Angular as well. So if I go to AngularJS, AngularJS official website. So this is angular.org is one. Here also you have something called API reference. Just like UFI, how you do have API for your AngularJS as well. If you see there are like different, see they have different every thing has different concept. If you see they also have input, and input control has what all can be used and how it can be used, etc. So this is how we can use an input control in case of AngularJS. So every framework adopts their own way. So in this case, whether it is string or etc., what's the max length, they use this is how the properties they use. So ng minimum length, they specify the number. So this is the syntax how they use in Angular. Okay. Whereas this is the syntax how we use in UFF framework. So framework to framework, the approach etc. could be different, but ultimately what they all enable is they offer a rich set of features. So here it offers by default input. We can control the minimum length that which you can enter in the input box, and event etc. on using change etc. you can try to trigger. So they're like different ways of defining it. Each of them will have their own explanation. So this is how the API looks, and this is how the sample example of using in AngularJS looks like. So just how we have used, we do have in AngularJS. The same applicable to React.js, Vue.js, etc. as well. So React.js. So modern programming language, everything will have an API, which tells you how to use the programming language. Earlier, this API concept wasn't existing, so all programming was not. See, if any new features were coming, those are not so quickly, transparently visible to the developer community. Now, developer community can quickly see what new features have come. So if you see just this control here, if you see this has been introduced in 1.28. So this particular feature. Now afterwards, if you see there could be some control. If you see, and 1.56 drag and drop function also was introduced. So and they're like it iteratively. If any new changes are there from API, we can easily come to know which is deprecated or which has been newly introduced. So those things can be see. If you see tab has been deprecated now, so instead, always we have to use press event. So there are like easy ways to figure out the any new features have come up or any features has got dropped. So that's the advantage of API, which gives granular level visibility of easily for the developer as well as for the building of applications as well. So the same every framework adopts similar approaches. So official website, if I go to React, so similarly React also do have. So they might be using different name altogether. Say here you have API reference. So okay, if I go here React. So this is how their API looks. So how to install main concepts, etc. And here they do have their own approaches. So how creating an element, creating a factor, etc. So these are different ways everybody tries to provide. So here they are try to give reference in a different way, and each of them uses different approaches. Okay, React uses all the more different way to define your applications, etc. All these all are single page applications only, um, and they use the concept called, we do not have multiple files of index files, we have single index file. Okay, now uh, to make it easy to understand, so now we have all the frameworks. So now what if we can leverage while building applications using some of the controls from AngularJS and using some of the controls from React.js and using some of the controls from UFI? What if we can use all these frameworks and try to build an application? Is it possible? So that scenario is nothing but your web components. So web components is a new project altogether in SAP Stack, where they try to we can use all UFA controls. If you're someone familiar with AngularJS and you're building your application AngularJS, you want to use UFA controls, then you can use UFA controls inside AngularJS project as well. And right now there are only 100 controls which are compatible for other frameworks. So that we call it. So if in this example, in general, the date picker control, we this is how a date picker control looks in UFI. Date So if we look at a date picker control first, so this is how a date picker control looks. Okay, so this is a date picker in UFI. Now this kind of date picker, every control might be different. But what if you wanted to use this kind of date picker control in AngularJS, you found out in UFI it is nice and good, and you want to use it. Then in AngularJS, if at all you have to use, so the syntax here is different. But to make it universally compatible, now in the web component, we can write this way, the control. So in regular control, how we write is, this is how we write as date. So I specify date picker this way, and I'll set the properties here. I'll call it as range, give some range here value. So if you see here, by default, the moment I call it, of course, there's a spaces here. The width space is small, so it's not able to render, but it's going to render the moment you write date picker in UFI this way. So date picker with properties, etc. What all I define, I can specify the values, etc. Now, this control, if at all we have to use, the syntax to be used is in if AngularJS, the same control I have to use. In UFI, we use it this way, but in AngularJS, if you have to use, the syntax UFI hyphen date hyphen picker. So this is how you have to use. If you use this way, it automatically renders the application. So which all controls that can be used across frameworks, those are defined as web components. Okay, so I'll show you quickly a demo. So currently there are like three applications which use UFI controls to build it. So I'll just show you quickly a demo. So this is an this if application. If you look at it, it looks like UFI application, but it's built using React.js. So using React.js, using web components approach, this application has been built. So the date control, etc., and editing. So the application everything looks like UFI, but now the idea is if open source there are lots of frameworks, if we enable them to build UF application using any platform or any framework, it gives larger community and larger feature sets, etc. So it makes developer choice. If you are someone comfortable with AngularJS and you prefer to build business application on for SAP, then SAP wants to make that process easy. So in that direction they're trying to provide some new stuff, and this is something which is very interesting. Okay, and the same application, if you see, you don't find any difference. This is actually built in AngularJS. This code is hosted on GitHub, and this is using, you know, this look like just like an UF application, but this is built on AngularJS using web components, right? So same we do have Vue.js. So Vue.js is also another framework, and currently most popular and trending is React.js. So every year one or the other. So 2 years, 3 years back, AngularJS was a buzzword. Now React.js is a buzzword everywhere, and Vue.js is also popular. If we see this one, the same application can be run on Vue.js. So any framework, UFI controls can be used across other frameworks also. So which all controls we do have? So let's check the list of controls we have here. So you can click on, this is a URL we have. So all about uh, frameworks and why do we use it. So hope I think so how the frameworks are evolving. If we understand it, we can be prepared to leverage all the best advantages which SAP is offering. Okay, you can just click on get started, and this currently it's hosted on GitHub. So you see the here they call it as components, but all are these are the controls currently which are supported. So there are around 100 controls. Not all controls are there. So gradually one control they're trying to add. And one more advantage is all web components are ES6 compatible. So I'll just explain what ES6 is all about. And if you see, there are like only few controls are there. Button, calendar, card, carousel, checkbox, etc. So all this can be see this how a simple UI5.carousel. So this is the tag you have to use custom tag. Maybe they'll define the API everything also. If project gets clicked, if more acceptance gets into the community, maybe SAP will keep evolving this platform, but I'm not sure how long it's going to sustain. But this is something very new in the market. Okay, so we can use it this way. So you have a carousel and you can add multiple images to just have this kind of effect where multiple images, etc., we can show as a carousel. So this is how uh, web components concept is all about and how it works. So this is how the we can write the syntax in any other frameworks. Okay. So how do we use web component? So you have to, if any project where you're doing it, running it. So all the applications will use Node.js in general. So on the Node.js, you just have to install. These are the steps to install. So we have to use npm install, then my web components, etc. We have to just project structure they're trying to create, and you have to use this is the command. So npm install UFI web components. We install this, all these controls, etc., would be available, and you can straight away start consuming this by looking at the API. You can just consume the applications. Okay. So prerequisites it. All you need is tools required is Node.js. That's it, and you have to install this one. If you install this, you have all the what are controls. If any new controls are released, maybe you have to update your framework, and all the new frameworks will be available. But we are not going to talk and deal with this because we are not actually going to talk about AngularJS or React.js, but we are just trying to understand that if you are familiar with AngularJS and React.js, then you can use web components to reuse all your UFI controls as well. But the other way around is right now it's still not possible, where we cannot pick Angular controls and try to put in UFI. That is still not there in picture. Maybe SAP will come up with that as well. But right now, all UFI controls can be leveraged within Angular, React, and Vue.js. Okay, so these are popular open source frameworks, JavaScript frameworks. Okay, there are lots of frameworks. These are just a few I'm just talking about. Okay, so this is in simple way to put together about frameworks and benefits of it. And I'm just going to talk a little bit background. We just have to have a little exercise out there. Let me take that as well. Me- I'll just take a simple um, blank file, new file. So here we can quickly to have as a short exercise, you can try to understand. So for if we are completely new, then I recommend to do at least one exercise using HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript just to understand the building blocks. And then when you try to use UFI, we can relate the concepts of reusability, etc., and how frameworks will give the benefit. To understand that, generally I recommend. So we have for starters, W3 schools is the best place to get started. So this is the best place, if you ask me, to understand better about web development. People who are completely new to Fiori or for web development altogether, they're coming from ABAP background, then it's highly recommended that you at least have brush up HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So learn HTML section if you select. So you have some basic uh, tutorials out there. So I'm going to suggest one simple exercises, and that will help us to understand web development, how the frameworks are using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as a backbone. And if you understand, there are like some rich controls, etc., we can play around for our development as well. So all the browsers are based on JavaScript itself. So we have some built-in for every browser has browser features as well. So if at all you are trying to use certain features of Chrome, etc., also, if you understand basics of JavaScript and etc., it will be advantage. So I'll just go a quick down low, or I mean, like, we'll talk about building blocks, exercises, etc. So this is an optional activity. If you want, you can just do this, or you can, if you do not want, also you can skip this, because these are nowhere related to our UFI approach. But these are useful when we start knowing more about UFI projects. Okay, for HTML5, so UFI framework is also built on top of UFI framework, built on top of HTML5. So we do have different versions. So there's a W3 group which manages, or which designs the rules, etc. And currently the latest version is HTML5. So all the browsers are following the now. There are like browsers previously. The major problem we used to face is not all browsers were having all the features. So HTML5 test, if you do, so so if you open this test in any browser, you'll just understand what all features, etc. So the problem with the frameworks also is, frameworks can design any control only if see, there's a governing body which stipulates these are the new features, and adoption of Google, Microsoft, etc., of those features is again there's a considerable delay. Okay, so because of those things, when we try to build a framework, again there should be some developer who has to rewrite the logic based on the new features which are released. So there is a considerable delay in this whole process. But out of this, if you look at it, Chrome is the one which is ahead of the curve with the rest of the browsers. So if you look at the score for Chrome browser, it's 528 out of 555. There are like lots of tags in the video tag also. Currently HTML parent in the sense, there's see for odata.org is the organization, and for Apache is a certain organization. For HTML, CSS, etc., they're like each programming language, there are like some governing bodies who decide which features, etc., would be universally acceptable. So every browser should be gradually they'll support MPEG 4 ASP support gradually. Now currently it's not supported. There like some audio tracking, video tracking are available as part of HTML library, but still Chrome hasn't yet implemented that. So if you look the same score now, if you see, so likewise they specify which all controls are supported by this browser. So unless this is supported, if it doesn't support this property, if we are using some date control, if it is using in the behind the scene, the parent libraries are using these particular methods. If browser doesn't support, our framework also doesn't support. So there's a cascading effect deep inside the framework. So now this is the same score I'll try to use in my Edge browser. So I'm using Microsoft Edge browser. Just this is just for understanding that how the frameworks uh, can have rich functionality or low functionality. It depends on your browser. Okay, so if you see here, it does also have 528 because Edge is based on Chrome engine. So it's also using Chrome based browser engine, because it's to keep up the pace, etc. It migrated from previously I think it used to use a different version altogether, but I think currently it is using Chrome engine. So because of that, even that has got 528 as a score. Okay. So both are having same set of features. So as long as it is HTML5 compatible and we have highest number, if you have very low in your IE, etc., it would be very low, then you cannot run your HTML5 applications at all. So UFI is a HTML5 application. It won't run because your browser doesn't support or doesn't recognize the latest control. So this is a simple check to understand. So this we used to do aggressively in um, couple of years back. Now the stage is very different. All Mozilla, Opera, every browser today has HTML5 compatible, and they very well support all the features. Okay, so this is the latest thing in HTML space, and in the CSS space we have similarly. This is like we call it a cascading style sheets. It's meant for revamping the look and feel. So let me say, so CSS in this we have something called CSS3. So CSS3 is the latest, and here itself, if we have something called the tab called CSS. So this will give you basic. So I recommend to check at least up to 3-4 exercises, which will tell you how to make use of. So if you see this buttons, etc., HTML plain button will be this way, like how we have used. But by adding CSS, it gets this, it transforms into something more beautiful. So the green color, background color, and the text color. So all these are part of CSS. So HTML is provides a building block. CSS adds some styling factor to the controls. So that's the CSS role it plays, and JavaScript enables to write logic. So when we are interacting with the control building block, so with some cosmetics, etc. So to add some logic, we use the help of JavaScript. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all three are backbones for any framework. So so to simply add, I'll just show you. So CSS, if I have to add here for the paragraph tag, I can use a property called style tag, and I can simply say color. So I can use color as red, and then if you see, so simply I could add some color to the tag. So this is inline declaration, but we are not going to use inline declaration. So in UFI we are going to use something called class selectors. So we have something called class selector. So class selector follows by dot, and then we specify something as any custom name. So CSS, I can say my class. So here I say my style sheet or something. Okay, my style sheet. So what I can do is I can specify it internally or externally. Now here in this case, in order to define any style tag, we use something called link. So okay, so using link tag, you know, to remember this syntax. These are we are not going to use this approach at all. Everything in the framework we have it, but this is just for understanding how it. So we have something called rel tag. We use it like as style sheet. I can just specify source. I can specify source and I can say some external file. I can specify my classes. So CSS also we write in the form of classes. So here I can write my class as this way. So dot my style sheet. And here I can specify within the braces the same color I can specify as color. So color I'll say as red, and or some size also, font size, width, etc., font weight, etc., font 22 px. So I can specify my properties, etc., inside this class. Now this class I can save it externally as some style.css. Okay, I'll set as all. See, for HTML page you say as .html. For style sheet you'll say .css. For JavaScript we'll say .js. Now this style sheet, now I can use it. I'll add one more tag. So this is my CSS, and where is, okay, this is my, HTML file becomes this way, CS file becomes this way. I'll open this in my notepad, and here I'll try to call this particular file. So in order to load this external file, what I'll say is, I'll say style.css. So if you're running locally, make sure both are in the same folder, because accordingly you have to define the path. If it is in some folder, you just have to define the path of the folder, but else you're good to use. Now I'll just add one more paragraph tag or something, any tag or some tag. I'll just say um, button basics, something is so I'll just define this class. So for button, rather than defining it to visualize it, I can define the classes. So we are going to use class based approach. So let's see how. Just refresh this button, it did not apply. Maybe the link source tag, there's a property called link equals style sheet. Go here. So external style sheet is what we use. Let me select as, yeah, this is a selector. I'll just take one example, class example. So external CSS definition, okay, here they defined it this way, that's fine. This is inline declaration. I can put inline declaration as well. Let me put it here this way, at least now, for now. Now let's use second. Let me take a nice example here. Mm, So I'm just taking some simple example here. CSS. Okay. So if you see this example here, I'll just trust. So any folder on your local space, you can just open them so that in editor you will have better look. So I have, I'm going to show some simple exercise of where how it benefits. So for external CSS, no, not the SRC, it's the href we have to use. So different for JavaScript we use SRC. So my bad. So we just you have to use as href. That's the reason it's not able to recognize. So we specify the external style. In this case, if you see, I defined some tags here. So my class files will have always dot. So this is what we are going to use in UFI. So now here I specified dot SAP UI brand. So here if I define any name with dot my style sheet now. So I'm just specifying it here as dot my style sheet. Simply we will say color. So basics of, if I specify it this way, this my style sheet, so dot followed by name, any custom name, whatever name we are giving it, that we can use it inside or up here. I'll just add one tag here. I'll just specify class. We have to specify this way. So when we specify it, all the text, now in this case I can say um, hello CSS. Okay, so just if I run this, I just have to go there and run it. So we the CSS, same CSS we have to run it. So it's external.cs. Now if you see hello.css, this is what we have written. So for using external, we are loading it, but in UFI we use class-based approach. There are like lots of other approaches, inline CSS, external CSS, etc. But all those we are not going to use. So I generally there's a small short exercises. What I generally uh, recommend to do is, so let me show you a quick one. So we can to understand better of all the concept. We can take our resume. So we can build a digital resume using HTML, CSS with nice CSS, etc. to understand all the concepts in a more better way. So let me show you one quick one. So this is what I'm going to run. So if you see here, this is a simple digital CV built using basic HTML and CSS. Okay, we can build something instead of writing a resume. So what we'll try to do is we'll try to create some nice resume using our programming. Using programming, we'll try to prepare CV. Or you can take any bill. If you're having some postpaid bill of your any postpaid bill or anything, or any bill, you can take it and try to design in using HTML. So any example, random use case you try to take and try to build, and you try to build the same thing using UF as well. So this will give you some benefits of, okay, what additional things I can do with the UFA and what things I can do with HTML. So to just have understanding of how basic building blocks using which how it appears, and the same thing how appears. So see, of course, as a look wise, appealing wise, using CSS, it completely changes the view of it. But no, let me show the underlying code for this particular resume. So it's very simple block of code. If you see, this is how I added a simple HTML tag, and I used simple paragraphs, and all paragraph tags I just use something called anchor tag. So anchor tags are like simple tags where I can use simple anchor tags to define. These are my handles. So this is my GitHub profile, and this is my Twitter profile, Facebook profile, etc. And I just specified looking forward to build my skills in UFF framework as a title. So to set title, we have H1 to H6 headers, and to define this text, we use something called paragraph. So I used a heading of a H3 or H4, and I used some H2. These are heading tags. So basic tags, we can write it this way. The same application, if at all you're trying to build, you can just any HTML page, you can just put HTML tag this way, and every HTML page will have an heading. So if you look at a browser, so this is very basics of our web development. If you look at the browser now, so if you take this window, this is we call it as a new tab which you're saying that is called as head, and the area below this whole area. So this will be measured in terms of 0 0. So this is an x-axis and y-axis. This is 0 0. Sorry, this is 0 0. And from we try to measure from left to right, etc. Even while CSS etc. adding also, we generally control from this axis. So it's completely this whole body, we call it as body, and this a new tab where you're seeing that is head. So generally in new tab we provide some favorite icons, etc. So if any website if you see, so always I take example of Wikipedia. So if you take Wikipedia now, if you look Wikipedia, they added in the head section some favorite icon, and they added some heading title to the head section, and they use within this whole is a body. So or the HTML tag to define such a website is HTML will have a head section slash head. So in the head, if I specify as title or text, okay, title I can say as CV. I'll just say my CV. If you want, I can give an this as well. So now I'll say as a body, I'll specify. We're going to define it as I'll say as H1 headings. We have like H1 to H6. So highest heading, if you want, you can use H1. I'll use H3. H1 would be too big. I can say digital CV. So you can just call it as digital CV. And in the body, I'm just saying digital CV. Now I'll just save this on my desktop. I'll just create a new folder. I'll call it as HTML or digital CV, and I should be able to save it cv.html, whatever name you want. So let me try to see how my heading and this one comes up. So if you see on the top, you got some default icon. This is a default icon, favorite icon. If you set any icon, automatically that icon it will be able to read. Else it will show this browser kind of see that, and CV whatever we defined that came, and in the body if you see the digital CV has come. So basic HTML tag will be there. So in order to better, so the real estate which we available is always limited. So to better organize, we do have lots of controls. So different basic HTML has something called div tags. So using div tags, we can partition the space into whatever way we want. Now, if you look at this page, so they use two multiple div tags. So this is a source code of it. The left side section is one div tag. This whole right side is one div tag. Okay, I'll just Wikipedia itself. If you right click on inspect, okay. So if you see, it has some tab called element. Element tab will show you what's the underlying how this particular, maybe this Wikipedia might have been built using some framework, but technically when it renders in a browser, it gets rendered in terms of a simple building block called this way. So if you see, it also has a heading, right, HTML, and it has a head, it has a body. If you see the head section, now in the head section they load all the script files. So if you see here, look at the structure here, they use link tag, they use external CSS, etc. So link tag refers to your CSS. So this is a CSS file they loaded. And when you see script tag is your JavaScript. So JavaScript is loaded using script tag. Your style sheet is loaded using link tag. And all the styles are inline declaration of your CSS. And all the link tags are your external CSS files. So these all are CSS files. When you see link tag, this is nothing but your CSS files. And when you look at the body now, in the usually in the head we specify all the tags. So when browser loads your application in order to load in the head section, so now in the head section if you place all the CSS files and JavaScript files, they have to load it first, then only your body can generate the UI factor itself, right? So we place any controls or tags generally in the head section. It's not mandatory that you have to place your script as CSS on the head tag. You can put them in body also, but the problem with body is your UI when it is rendering it, you'll see that see It's like half baked kind of thing, where you'll not see the UI rendering properly. You'll see gradually loading all the images, background images, etc. Very slowly it loads. Even if here, if you take here, when I click on this image, um, if you see the moment I'm navigating this page, there is no difference. You all the images are loaded automatically, because these images etc would be generally put on the head section. So if you put in head section, libraries will be loaded first, then your page renders. So the processing time of our browser or runtime is very quick. We will not be able to notice that difference, but technically we put all the libraries on the head section, because we want to make sure the moment the tab loads, the libraries gets loaded, then the body content gets generated. Okay, that's the idea behind placing all our script files etc in the head section. Okay, let me go back here. This is not one. Now, similarly in the body, like we saw, they're like div tags. So what I was trying to say, so in the div tag, they have set as page, base, left area, right area, main area. So what are the name they want to give? Multiple div tags using which they'll try to partition the space. Okay, you can partition the space as well. I'll put some image here. So I'll add some. So here I'll use now in the head section. Now I'm going to add some. This is inline declaration. I'm using style. I'll use it. So style is an inline declaration where all the CSS etc. I can place it here. So I'll say now I'm using H3 heading, right? So I'll say for H3 whatever I want to have, I can just specify the colors etc. features, or I can define it as well. Let me pick some nice CSS properties. So I'm picking some CSS properties, external CSS properties. These are very rarely we use, but these are all reusable kind of. So they're like fixed. So for colors, what you can just play around with the colors, etc. Mm, So for the body, I just use big background color. So these all from the W3 schools CSS section. There you'll have all the handy what all properties we can use etc. So that's the reason I say how to what element to use for background color, background image etc. So first five access will give us those handy tools which can be used. So background color etc. So I use simple color. I'll use for the H2 center etc, right? So these are the tags. So in this case we use H3. I can specify H3, and automatically for H3, wherever H3 used, this CSS will be applied. This approach we call it as um, you know internal CSS. So internal CSS. So this is internal CSS definition, and if I specify it something this way, now I'll say H2. If I specify style directly, this we call it as inline definition. So I can specify the same. I can let me. I'll say text align. I'll say style here. In this case, I'm going to use in the within the style tag text align equal to. I'll say uh, picture upload image. Okay, I added inline CSS, and now using external CSS, if I have to add, I'll just add external CSS as well. So all three types of CSS definitions I'm using right now, just to illustrate. In the head section itself we'll add. So in head section in under style tag I added. So in the head section itself I'm going to add one more tag called external style. So here I'll say style.css. Okay. So this whole what are content is there, the same content I can try to reuse. So I'll use couple of more CSS where maybe I'll use some font. I'll just use one simple font here, and here I'll just define same folder. You have to define it in the same folder where you have it, because we are using relative paths. Okay, I'll call it. I'll just this say any name you can give. There is as a class files dot. If you're using it, we call it as class based. If you use pound, we call it as ID based. So this is an ID based approach is also supported. So ID based, I can give the same ID as some say say for all buttons some ID I can define, and I can define it. So I'll specify some other font. For different font I can specify, etc. So here see this, I can define colors in multiple ways as well. Colors can be in RGB, HSL, so hue saturation levels. In some countries they use, RGB, and a few notations. The most popular one is hexadecimal. You can use hash followed by hexadecimal, 6-digit hexadecimal for color coding. So that supports lots of colors. For RGB colors, it ranges from 0 to 255. This value, red, green, blue, range would be 0 to 255, and even HSL also the same. But whereas hex value will start with hash, and you have to use a 6-digit code. It can range to whatever extent. So any color picker you can pick it, and you can use the colors as well. Or you can write simply basic colors. If you want red, blue, green, etc., also you can give the value, and there is no problem with defining the colors. Now this one I can save this as a style sheet. Save as a name also. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be style. So now we use style. Now this has can be referenced in our CV. So I'm just referencing this one. Now for any tag I can apply this particular CSS as well. So what I'll try to do is I'll use one paragraph tag where I'll say specify it as objective. Say one more paragraph tag. I work as a UI5 developer and looking forward to build cool applications. Okay, something so this is my objective. Maybe I can specify some objective this way. And now to apply it from the Excel sheet, what are we defined? How do we apply is, so what are the name we have given in the Excel CSS, the style sheet name. So those names we have to use. So here we have defined it something called UI cursive, so or all button. So you want all button, I'll use all button. If I want class, I'll use class. So let me show you both. So I can use class. So each time, because I am opening in Notepad, it's getting closed. I have to reopen every time, because Notepad, when I open CSS, automatically it gets closed. I can specify my class property here. Class dot UI cursor. Now if we try to look at the output now, the same application which we used, if I select now, if you see, we got in much more uh, CSS effect you could see. So basic HTML we were able to add the tags, but the CSS tags were actually defining how it has to appear. Now if you look at it, what all we have added. So if you look at content here, so the digital CV heading. So what are we specified it? So for that I did not specify anything inline. Okay, but I have specified it in the external file. So where I specified as H3. So this is one way of defining tags. So where are H3 used? Everywhere this color digital CV will be appearing it. To test this idea, you can add one more H3 tag here, where I can say tag. I can say it as my social profile profile. So I can say something social profile. I can just see. So if you see automatically the color. So what are the external, what are the internal CSS has been defined, that is coming into picture, right? So wherever H3 tag is used, so this definition, what does this definition says? Whenever anything, any CSS definition under style tag, if you specify it, and wherever H3 tag appears, always the color would be this RGB color, whatever we have picked it up, and it will be always aligned in the center. So that's what whenever H3 comes, we are aligning it to center, and that instruction is being passed from the internal CSS, which we have defined. And likewise, now if you see, there is one more definition called inline definition, where for the H2 tag, what I have specified is I specified inline, I specified text align to the end. So this is CSS property. So these properties all are available in your W3 schools. So some basic properties understanding, if we know, we'll be able to use these properties. So here upload image, I wanted to, I was asking them to upload an image under extreme right. So I specified it. So I can reduce the font size as well. I can specify some font size, etc. so that the font will be appear a little smaller. And for the paragraph tag, I use a different approach called external CSS, where I used my CSS in an external file, and the external file, I defined a class. So defining class can be done using dot. And in UFI, we follow only class-based approach. You can forget the internal, external, inline, and ID base, etc. And all we use is class-based CSS definition. You can create your custom classes, and even SAP UFI has provided lots of CSS classes. I'm going to show what all classes as well. So now object to UI cursive I have specified, and the cursive font is like in the CSS we have seen. So for font family and font size, etc. are defined. So it's cursive. So it appears cursive. So you can create something more image, etc. Also you can add, and you can play around, and you can create one exercise so that you will understand better about HTML and CSS. So these are building blocks. I think we have had uh, quite a long session. I'll stop it here. So you can play around with any use case, and you can play around with all the tags out there, and you can create something of this way. So I used some background color. You can use some color, and stuff. I use some image instead of it, and I just use some hyperlinks. It's all about using some building blocks, and you can try to build one use case. So this will give us some foundation knowledge of HTML and CSS. That is very much required. Okay, and this is where the CSS files for UFA framework you'll find. On the tool section, you'll have something called show. This is a theme parameter box. Okay, so if you go to theme parameter box for correct, you can select a theme. So this Fiori 3 is, this is what the Fiori 3. So if you see, these all are CSS classes of CSS. So SAP UI brand is a CSS class. So if you want to use this color, you can copy this, and you can place it in your application, or you can place it in, of course it's not recommended. So these are the classes. So UFI uses class approach. They call it as class 3, class 1. They gave a naming convention, but all, if you see, there are lakhs of at least there are at least thousands of CSS classes. All the UI theme designer uses is based on classes only. So we use class based approach only in our UFI, and this is how the classes will be defined, and these colors, etc. Instead of defining a color, we use classes. Because of this only, any new theme SAP ships it, they try to override the class files with the new colors, options, etc. So always there will be downward compatibility. So that's the flexibility and advantage of using class based approach. Okay, so that's it for today. I think we understood class-based approach of CSS and the building blocks of it, and we'll connect on tomorrow's class. Any questions, or we could?
No. Okay.
Okay, okay, okay. We'll catch up tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.